For a man who measured life in power and control, love was the one battle he never saw coming. Liam Callahan had the city's underworld in the palm of his hand, but he was not prepared for the chaos that a single woman, the daughter of his mortal enemy, would bring to his empire and, most of all, to his heart. And most of all, to his heart. If you love impossible love stories, stay until the very end, because this one will have you hooked. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. The rain fell on Boston like a whispered confession, washing the city in shades of slate and charcoal. It struck the tall, arched window of Liam Callahan's study, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass, demanding entry into the oppressive silence within. Inside, the only sounds were the hiss and pop of seasoned oak in the grand fireplace, and the slow, deliberate turn of a page. Liam sat in a wingback leather chair that had belonged to his father, and his father's father before him. The room smelled of old books, peat from the fire, and the faint, clean scent of rain-soaked wool from his coat, now discarded. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the small table beside him, its amber liquid catching the firelight. He hadn't touched it in an hour. The warmth it promised felt like a lie. He wasn't reading the book open on his lap. The words, "elegant prose from a long-dead poet," were a meaningless blur. His gaze was fixed on the flames, but his mind was miles away, caught in the cold, intricate web of his life. Today had been a day of whispers, of meetings in the back rooms of quiet pubs where loyalty was measured in the shiftiness of a man's eyes, of phone calls where the silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes more than any threat could. This was his inheritance. Not the money, not the properties, not the fear he commanded with a single, level glance. It was this crushing weight, the constant thrumming vigilance. He felt the cold, heavy gold of his father's signet ring on his finger, a permanent reminder of the blood that flowed in his veins, and the blood that had been spilled to protect his name. A soft knock at the door, so hesitant it was almost an apology. Liam didn't move, didn't acknowledge it. He knew who it was. Finn. Always watching, always waiting. A shadow with unwavering loyalty. The door opened with a soft creak. "Liam?" Finn's voice was low, rough around the edges like frayed rope. "They're waiting for your word on the dock shipments." Liam finally let his eyes drift from the fire, not to Finn, but to the rain-streaked window. He could see the blurred lights of the city across the water. A city of ghosts and promises. His city. "My word," he thought, the phrase tasting like ash in his mouth. Men lived and died by his word. Fortunes were made and lost. He was 29 years old, and his word could move mountains of steel and snuff out lives like candle flames. The thought brought him no pride, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. "The Falcones are getting bold," Finn added, stepping further into the room. The concern in his voice was a tangible thing, thick in the air between them. "Moving on our territory. It's a message." Liam's jaw tightened, a subtle ripple of muscle that was his only outward reaction. The Falcones. The name was a splinter under his skin. A rivalry as old as the cobblestones in the North End, passed down through generations. The Callahans and the Falcones, the Irish and the Italians, a bloody, unending ballad of pride and territory. Giovanni Falcone, the family's don, was a man of theatrical cruelty, all smiles and handshakes that felt like threats. Liam finally looked at Finn. His friend's face was etched with worry, his gaze earnest. "Tell the men to stand down," Liam said, his voice quiet, yet carrying an authority that filled the vast room. Finn's brow furrowed. "Stand down? Liam, they spat in our face. If we show weakness." "Is it weakness to choose the battlefield?" Liam countered, his voice dropping even lower. He leaned forward, the firelight carving sharp angles onto his face. "Or is it strategy? Let Giovanni have his little victory. Let him think we're slow to react. Let him get comfortable." He picked up his glass, the ice clinking softly, a sound as final as a closing cell door. There are smarter ways to win a war than firing the first shot. He hated it. He hated the game, politics, the patient, venomous dance. But he knew how to play. His father had taught him nothing else. Finn held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. The trust in that simple gesture was another weight on Liam's shoulders. He turned back to the window, dismissing his most trusted man without another word. The door clicked shut, and silence reclaimed the room. Alone again, Liam closed his eyes. He listened to the rain, and for a fleeting, insane moment, he let himself wonder what it would be like to just open the window, climb out, and walk away. To disappear into the downpour and become no one. A ghost without a name. But Callahans didn't run. They ruled or they died. There was no in-between. Miles away, in a brownstone in the city's opulent South End, the world was not made of shadows and silence, but of light and color. The air in Alessia Falcone's attic studio smelled of linseed oil, turpentine, and the sweet, earthy fragrance of damp clay. Canvases, some finished, some hauntingly blank, leaned against every wall. Afternoon light, pale and milky through the large skylight, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny silent sprites. Alessia stood before a large easel, a single smudge of ultramarine blue on her cheek. Her hair was loosely tied back, but rebellious strands had escaped to frame her face. She was completely absorbed, her body swaying slightly with the movement of her brush. On the canvas before her was not a portrait, not a landscape, but a chaotic, beautiful storm of color and texture. It was the only place she felt she could be honest. The only place where the name Falcone meant nothing. Here, she wasn't a daughter. She wasn't a prize to be married off for a strategic alliance. She was just a hand that held a brush, a heart that beat in time with the colors she mixed on her palette. She felt a surge of something close to joy as she added a slash of fiery cadmium red to the canvas. It was fierce and untamed. It was everything she was not allowed to be. The floorboards creaked behind her. The joy vanished, replaced by a familiar, quiet tension that settled in her shoulders. She didn't have to turn around. The scent of his cologne, expensive, sharp, and overbearing, announced him before his shadow fell across her canvas. "Still playing with your paints, Mia Cara?" The voice of her father, Don Marco Falcone, was smooth like aged wine, but it held an undertone that always made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She slowly placed her brush down, her hands suddenly feeling clumsy. A drop of red paint fell onto the wooden floor, bright as blood. She turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a stark, dark figure against the light of her studio. His smile was perfectly polished, but it never, ever reached his eyes. His eyes were like chips of obsidian, holding an unnerving stillness. "Papa," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She wiped her hands on a rag, a useless gesture to occupy them. "I didn't hear you come in. I wanted to see my little artist," he said, walking into the room. His expensive shoes were silent on the paint-splattered floorboards. He walked around her, his eyes scanning the canvases, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at the art. He was assessing property. "You have a gift. It is a shame so few get to see it." She felt a familiar prickle of resentment. "My gift is my own. It is the only thing that is." She kept the thought locked safely behind her teeth. "It's not for anyone else," she said quietly. "It's just for me." Her father stopped in front of her latest piece, the chaotic storm of red and blue. He tilted his head. "Anger," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "And passion. You have the Falcone fire in you, even if you try to hide it behind all this gentleness." He turned his gaze on her, and she felt herself shrink under its intensity. It was the same look he gave his lieutenants before he delivered an order. "I came to tell you we will have a guest for dinner Sunday," he continued, his tone casual, a clear warning that the topic was anything but. "The son of Antonio Genovese, a good family, a strong family. It is time you started thinking about your future, Alessia." The air left her lungs. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A Genovese. Another name. Another cage. This one gilded with a wedding ring. She could picture him already, a boy with his father's arrogant eyes and a life already mapped out for him, a life that would surely suffocate her. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. She saw the look in her father's eyes. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in the guise of fatherly concern. "He is a good man," her father said, reaching out to gently brush the smudge of paint from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture felt both intimate and terrifying. His touch was dry and cold. "You will be happy." He smiled again, that same empty, polished smile, before turning and walking out, leaving the scent of his cologne and the weight of his expectations behind. Alessia stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the bright red drop of paint on the floor. The storm on her canvas suddenly felt tame, a pale imitation of the hurricane raging inside her chest. She looked out the skylight at the gray, weeping sky. It felt like the sky of a different city entirely from the one Liam Callahan watched from his window. A city of cages, not kingdoms. And she was trapped in the most beautiful one of all. The weight of her father's decree settled over Alessia like a shroud. For 2 days, the walls of the brownstone seemed to close in on her, the opulent furniture and silk curtains feeling like the bars of a beautifully crafted cage. The smell of turpentine in her studio, once a scent of freedom, now seemed to mock her, a reminder of a passion that would soon be relegated to a mere hobby, something to occupy her hands while her future was decided for her. She had to get out. She chose the Boston Public Library. It was a place of ghosts and whispers, a cathedral of stories where a person could disappear for hours, lost in the hushed reverence of its halls. It was one of the few places in the city she could go alone without raising suspicion. To her father, a trip to the library was a harmless, ladylike pursuit. He had no idea it was her most defiant act of rebellion. Stepping from the damp chill of Copley Square into the library's magnificent entrance hall felt like entering another world. The cool, still air smelled of aged paper, floor polish, and the faint, sweet scent of decaying leather. The echo of her footsteps on the marble floor was a comforting, solitary sound. She didn't go to the main reading rooms. Instead, she climbed the grand staircase, her hand gliding over the cool, smooth stone of the banister, and made her way to the 3rd floor. To the Sargent Gallery. The room was a long, vaulted hall, its atmosphere heavy and dramatic. The murals covering the walls were dark and epic, depicting a dense, swirling mythology of gods and prophets. It was overwhelming and somber, a perfect mirror for the tempest in her own heart. She found a spot at the far end of the hall, where the light from a tall window was weakest, and stood before a panel depicting a figure shrouded in shadow, their face obscured, but their posture conveying a profound, eternal sorrow. She felt a kinship with the faceless figure, trapped in a narrative not of their own making. She was so lost in the painting, in the raw emotion it stirred within her, that she didn't notice the man standing a dozen feet away, partially hidden by the shadow of an archway. Liam hadn't come to the library for art. He'd come for the anonymity. He'd left Finn in the suffocating confines of his world behind, needing a space where the name Callahan was just a name, not a crown and a curse. He often came here, to this dark hall, finding a strange comfort in the painted struggles of gods and mortals. It was a reminder that conflict was a story as old as time. He had been watching the mural, letting his mind go blessedly blank, when he saw her. He had noticed her the moment she walked in. It wasn't just her beauty, though she possessed it in a quiet, unassuming way that was more captivating than the garish glamour of the women who usually move through his world. It was the way she moved. There was a purpose in her stride, but a fragility in her posture, as if she were carrying an invisible burden. Now, watching her stand before the mural, he saw her shoulders relax for the first time. He saw the tension leave her neck as she tilted her head, her focus absolute. She wasn't just looking at the paint. She was communing with it. A flicker of something unfamiliar sparked in his chest. A warmth. It was the sight of someone experiencing a moment of pure, unadulterated truth, and he found himself envious of it. He took a step forward, the soft scuff of his leather shoe on the stone floor barely audible. But it was enough. Alessia flinched, startled out of her reverie. Her head snapped in his direction, her eyes wide. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. The fear was instinctive, a reflex honed by a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. Then her expression softened into one of mild embarrassment. He stopped, holding his hands up in a small, placating gesture. "My apologies," he said, his voice a low murmur that was easily absorbed by the cavernous room. "I didn't mean to startle you." His voice was calm, a deep and steady current. It wasn't the voice of the kind of men she knew. There was no arrogance in it, no cloying charm. Just a simple, direct sincerity. She felt the frantic hammering of her heart begin to slow. "It's all right," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. "I was somewhere else." "I know the feeling," he said, taking another slow step, not closer to her, but alongside her, so they were both facing the mural. This room has a way of doing that. They stood in silence for a long moment, a shared unspoken truce. Alessia was acutely aware of him beside her. He was tall, and he carried an aura of stillness that was unnerving, and yet, strangely, comforting. He smelled faintly of rain and clean wool. "It's the triumph of the spirit," Liam said quietly, his gaze on the painted figures. That's what he was painting. Not gods and monsters, but the fight that happens inside all of us. The light against the dark. Alessia turned to look at him properly for the first time. His profile was strong, classic, like something carved from stone. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a deep, stormy gray, and they held a profound sadness, a weariness that seemed far too old for his face. He wasn't looking at her but at the wall, yet she felt completely, utterly seen. "I've never thought of it that way," she confessed. "I always just saw the sorrow." "The sorrow is there," he agreed, finally turning his gray eyes to meet hers. A jolt went through her, a spark of connection so unexpected it stole her breath. But the sorrow is what makes the triumph meaningful, isn't it? There's no courage without fear, no light without darkness. His gaze was intense, probing, as if he were looking past her face and directly into her soul. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the startling intimacy of the moment. He was a stranger. She knew nothing about him, but in his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own caged heart. "He understands," a small voice whispered in her mind. The great clock in the main hall chimed the hour, its deep, resonant tones echoing up into the gallery. The sound broke the spell. Alessia blinked, pulling her gaze away. "I should go," she said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. She felt a sudden, desperate pang of regret. She didn't want the moment to end. "Of course," Liam said. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of respectful dismissal, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of the same reluctance she felt. There was a pause, a small eternity suspended in the dusty, art-filled air. This was the moment to exchange names, to offer a polite pleasantry that might lead to something more. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but the habits of a lifetime were too strong. Her name was a liability. His, he assumed, would be no different. To remain anonymous was to remain safe. "It was nice talking to you," she said, turning to leave. "And you," he replied, his voice quiet behind her. She walked away without looking back, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every step felt like she was pulling against a magnet. She descended the grand staircase, re-entered the bustling city, and was swallowed by the afternoon crowds. But she wasn't the same person who had entered the library an hour before. The image of a stranger's sad, knowing eyes was burned into her mind, a tiny, dangerous spark of light in her carefully guarded darkness. Liam remained in the gallery long after she was gone, staring at the spot where she had stood. The room felt colder now, emptier. The scent of her perfume, something light and floral, like jasmine after a rain, lingered in the air. He touched his father's ring on his finger, the cold metal a familiar anchor in a world that had suddenly, inexplicably tilted on its axis. He had come here seeking emptiness, and had instead found a connection so potent it frightened him. He didn't know her name. He knew nothing about her. And yet he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had to find her again. The encounter in the library left a crack in Liam's carefully constructed armor. The woman's face, her wide, expressive eyes, the hint of defiance in the set of her jaw, lingered in his thoughts. An unwelcome and persistent ghost. He found himself distracted in meetings, his gaze drifting to the window as he replayed their brief conversation. It was a troubling shift in his focus, a risky weakness he couldn't afford. He tried to push the memory away, to bury it under the daily weight of his responsibilities, but it refused to be buried, resurfacing in the quiet moments between threats and negotiations. A week later, the ghost became flesh. He was in the North End, the heart of the Italian territory. It was a brazen move, a calculated risk. One of his establishments, a small old-world bakery that served as a discreet front for moving information, had reported a visit from Falcone's men. It was a subtle act of intimidation, a flexing of muscle on their home turf. Liam had to respond, not with aggression, but with presence. He had to show them he was not afraid to walk their streets, to breathe their air. He sat in a small cafe across the street from the bakery, a place that smelled of roasted coffee beans and anise. He was alone, having ordered Finn to stay in the car a block away. This needed to be a personal statement. He nursed a small cup of espresso, its bitter taste sharp on his tongue, his eyes methodically scanning the street. The air was thick with unspoken warnings. He could feel the weight of watchful eyes tracking his presence from shop doorways and second-story windows. He took a slow sip of his coffee and let them watch. And then he saw her. She was walking down the sidewalk, carrying a brown paper bag filled with groceries. Her head was down, her focus on navigating the crowded street. She wore a simple dress, the color of a summer sky, that made her stand out against the neighborhood's muted palette of brick and stone like a wildflower pushing through concrete. Liam's heart gave a single hard jolt against his ribs. It was her, the woman from the library. Here. The coincidence was too sharp, too cruel. For a disorienting moment, the world narrowed to her face, the way a stray strand of dark hair fell across her cheek. The noise of the street, the rumble of traffic, the distant chatter faded into a dull hum. The eyes watching him ceased to matter. There was only her. And then the cafe door opened. Two of Falcone's men stepped out onto the sidewalk, creating an obstacle in her path. They were large, their cheap suits stretched tight across their shoulders. One of them, a man with a scarred lip and a look of unearned confidence, smiled at her. It was not a pleasant smile. "Alessia, Bella," the man drawled, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "You shouldn't be carrying heavy things. Let us help you." Alessia. The name was beautiful. It suited her. But it was the sound of the man's possessive tone that sent a sharp chill of anger through Liam's veins. He watched as Alessia stiffened. The fragility he'd seen in the library was gone, replaced by a shield of cold composure she wore like armor. She clutched her grocery bag tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Thank you. But I'm fine, Luca," she said, her voice steady. But Liam, a connoisseur of hidden tells, could see the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand. The man named Luca chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. He stepped slightly into her path, causing her to pause. "Your father, he worries about you," he said, his tone overly familiar. "He asks us to keep an eye out, to make sure you're safe." The word safe was a lie, a veiled threat. They weren't protecting her, they were marking her, displaying her like a trophy to the neighborhood. Like him. Liam's hand tightened around the small, warm ceramic cup. The strategist in his mind screamed at him to stay put, to observe, to gather information. Intervening was illogical, a foolish impulse that would escalate everything. But as he watched her chin lift in a gesture of pure defiance, another, more primal instinct took over. "I can take care of myself," she said, her voice now edged with steel. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She tried to step around them, But the second man shifted his position, once again causing her to stop. A wave of panic, quick and sharp, flashed across her face before she could conceal it. That was it. The debate in his mind was over. He placed a few bills on the table and stood up. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, but his posture was coiled tight as a spring. He walked out of the cafe, the small bell above the door chiming his exit, a sound that seemed to announce a shift in the very atmosphere of the street. The air on the street was cool, but the tension was a palpable heat. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, the two men's attention shifted to him. Their smirks faltered, replaced by confusion, then recognition. Their posture changed. The lazy arrogance was gone, replaced by a guarded hostility. Liam Callahan, here. Alessia's eyes widened, a storm of shock and disbelief in them as she recognized him. The man from the library. The question died on her lips as she saw the look on the faces of her father's men. It was a look she knew well. It was a look they gave a rival. Liam ignored the men. His gaze was fixed solely on Alessia, a silent question in his eyes. He saw the fear there, but underneath it, he saw the same trapped spirit he had seen in the art gallery. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm, yet it cut through the street noise like a razor. Luca, the scarred man, puffed out his chest. "This is a family matter. It's got nothing to do with you, Callahan." The use of his name was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. Liam's eyes didn't leave Alessia's face. "She looks like she wants to be left alone." "She's one of ours," the second man growled. "You should get back to your own side of town." The realization hit Alessia with the force of a tidal wave. Callahan. The name of her father's sworn rivals. Her world had just been split open by a truth she was never meant to face. She looked at him, and finally saw it. The quiet authority, the stillness that wasn't peace, but coiled power. "I think the lady can speak for herself," Liam said, his voice dangerously soft. His gaze finally shifted from Alessia to Luca, and the temperature on the sidewalk seemed to drop 10 degrees. "So, I'll ask you again. Is there a problem?" Luca shifted his weight, his bravado wavering. He felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him, and made a foolish decision to reassert his dominance. Before he could act, Liam closed the distance in a single, fluid step. He didn't raise a hand. He simply stood before Luca, his presence so immense and overpowering, his stare so direct and dissecting, that it felt like a physical pressure. Luca flinched back instinctively, his nerve completely broken. He stumbled into a stack of empty vegetable crates with a loud clatter that sounded like an admission of defeat. The second man tensed, but froze as Liam's cold, gray eyes locked onto him. The message in that gaze was absolute. The man's resolve crumbled under the silent weight of it. The street had gone silent. The entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Liam turned his back on the men, a gesture of such complete dismissal it was more powerful than any action. He looked at Alessia, his face unreadable. Her groceries were scattered on the sidewalk. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a terrifying new understanding. He bent down, picked up a fallen apple, and gently placed it back in her bag. His fingers brushed against hers. The contact was a startling spark, a warmth that made them both flinch. "You should go home," he said, his voice now low and urgent, for her ears only. "It's not safe here." He straightened up and walked away without another word. He walked down the street with the same unhurried pace, disappearing around the corner, leaving behind a shattered silence, two visibly unsettled men from the Falcone crew, and a woman trying to make sense of a new, dangerous reality. Alessia did not remember the walk home. Her feet seemed to find their way through the streets on sheer instinct, while her mind remained caught in a spinning storm of disbelief. Callahan. The name echoed inside her like a stone dropped into still water, sending shockwaves across every memory she had of the man who stood beside her in the library. It was a name that had always lived in the background of her life, whispered in warnings, sharpened in rivalries, embedded in stories about power and caution. A boundary, a threat, a force her father treated with a mixture of vigilance and disdain. And now that name belonged to the man with quiet eyes who spoke about art as if he carried a lifetime of storms behind them. When she reached the brown stone, her hands trembled so much she struggled to turn the key in the lock. The grocery bag was crushed in her arms, apples bruised and bread bent out of shape, as if even those simple objects had not survived the shock with her. Inside, the house was silent. She was grateful for it. She could not face her father, not with the weight she carried, not with the confusion stamped so visibly on her face. She fled to her attic studio, the one place where she could breathe, but even that sanctuary felt altered. The soft, filtered light through the skylight suddenly felt cold. The familiar smell of linseed oil and clay couldn't calm the tremor in her hands. She stopped in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around her body, trying to contain the chaos that threatened to spill out of her chest. Her mind kept replaying everything. Her father's men, their heavy presence in the street, the way the tension rose the moment Liam appeared. Not loud or dramatic, just steady, controlled. A shift so powerful it changed the air. And then his eyes. The way he looked at her first, as if making sure she was all right before acknowledging the men blocking her path. That memory burned the brightest. She sank onto a wooden stool, pulling her knees close, grounding herself. For a moment, one reckless thought surfaced. He helped me. But she crushed it immediately. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't a stranger stepping in out of kindness. He was Callahan, and he had stepped into her world in a way no one had ever dared. Whatever intention he carried, it would always ripple far beyond her. She was not separate from the power structures around her. She wasn't invisible to those who watched for shifts in control. Whether he meant to or not, his presence had placed her at the center of a rivalry far bigger than either of them. Her hands still trembled. The brief moment when their fingers had touched replayed in her memory, not with warmth, but with confusion, a reminder of how complicated everything had become. It wasn't the touch itself, but the timing, the weight behind it, the way it had marked a turning point. A wave of frustration and hurt surged through her. At him, for stepping into her life without knowing the consequences she would bear. At her father, for creating a world where she existed under constant scrutiny. And at herself, for having felt a fragile thread of connection with a man who lived across the line she was never allowed to cross. Liam sat in the back of the car while Finn drove through the rain-streaked streets. The city lights blurred into streaks of muted color. The tension in his shoulders refused to ease. That was a risk, Finn said quietly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. A serious one. Liam didn't respond immediately. His gaze rested on his hands, calm and steady in appearance, though he felt anything but calm inside. He had grown up learning to navigate conflict with precision and restraint, and he knew he had crossed an invisible boundary today. But seeing Alessia cornered like that, caught between obligation and fear, had struck something deep in him, something he wasn't ready to name aloud. "She's Falcone's daughter," Finn continued. "Alessia, people saw you step in. Word will spread by morning. Falcone will take it as a message." "I'm aware," Liam said quietly. "He'll take it as a challenge, Liam, as if you're pushing into his family matters." "Let him," Liam said. But it wasn't anger that fueled his words. It was something far more difficult to untangle. A blend of responsibility, frustration, and a lingering image of her face in that moment when she realized who he truly was. Finn hesitated before speaking again. "You didn't do it for strategy." Liam's jaw tightened. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a slow breath. No, he hadn't. This wasn't the kind of calculated move he was known for. He had acted before thinking, guided not by logic but by instinct, dangerous, unpredictable instinct. The part he regretted most was the look in Alessia's eyes when she put the pieces together. The recognition, the shock, the uncertainty. Not fear of him, not exactly, but something close. Something that told him she no longer saw the man in the library. She saw the name, the legacy, the reality. "She thinks I'm like them," Liam murmured under his breath. Finn didn't respond, but the silence in the car said enough. Liam leaned his head back, staring at the dark ceiling of the sedan. The night outside felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. The events replayed in his mind, Not the confrontation, not the tension with Falcone's men, but the way Alessia looked as she walked away, carrying more weight than she had before. He had stepped into that moment to prevent something from escalating, yet he had become part of the escalation himself. "She didn't ask for any of this," Liam said softly. He meant it more than he expected. The car continued through the rain-slicked streets, carrying him back to his penthouse, a quiet, empty structure of glass and steel, while the realization settled in. He had changed the course of her life tonight. And for the first time in years, the thought of consequences made him feel something that was neither victory nor control. It felt like responsibility, and it was heavier than anything he had carried in a long time. The story of the confrontation in the North End spread through the city's influential circles like a subtle, potent rumor. It was told in hushed tones in the back of dimly lit bars, whispered over phone lines, and debated in the kitchens of powerful men. Every version was slightly different, but the core facts remained the same. Liam Callahan had walked onto Falcone territory, and a public tense standoff had occurred, with Marco Falcone's daughter at the center of it. The implication was profound, a masterpiece of political maneuvering. To challenge a man's associates is one thing. To become involved in a situation concerning his own family was an act of psychological gamesmanship so audacious it was almost poetic. It created the perception that Falcone's control over his own affairs was not as absolute as he wanted rivals to believe. For 2 days the city held its breath, waiting for the inevitable countermove, a show of force, a strategic realignment. But the response, when it came, was not a loud declaration. It was a silence more unsettling than any open threat. In the Falcone brownstone, the silence was a heavy, charged presence. Alessia had confined herself to her studio, but the tense quiet of the house seeped under the door, a cold draft that she couldn't escape. Her father had not spoken a word to her about the incident. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded an explanation. He had simply looked at her once, his obsidian eyes flat and unreadable, a look that made her feel intensely scrutinized and judged. That look was worse than any confrontation. It was a look of cold assessment, acknowledging that she was now at the center of a delicate family matter. She had inadvertently become a point of tension between rival families. The silence broke on the third night. She was summoned to his study for a private conversation. Not the family dining room, but the formal, intimidating space where he conducted his business. A place she had not entered since she was a child. The room was paneled in dark wood and smelled of cigar smoke and authority. Her father sat at the head of the massive mahogany desk. He seemed distant, preoccupied. She sat, her back ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap. The air was thick with unspoken tension. He finally broke the silence, his voice dangerously soft. "The dinner with the Genovese family has been postponed." Alessia's heart fluttered with a wild, treacherous hope, but she crushed it instantly. This was not a reprieve. "Antonio Genovese called me this morning," her father continued, his eyes fixed on her, cold and analytical. "He offered his thoughts on the public situation our family is currently navigating." The words felt heavy. A sense of responsibility, hot and sharp, washed over her. "He worries that a daughter who attracts such attention from a man like Callahan may not be a suitable match for his son's future, that her presence may bring complications." He picked up a silver fork, turning it over in his fingers. "He worries that the Falcone family's position has been made more complex." "Papa, I did nothing," she whispered, the words feeling fragile and useless. "You were there," he interrupted, his voice cutting like glass. "And you were seen. Your involvement, however brief, has become a political issue. Callahan played a masterful hand. He didn't attack my businesses. He complicated my alliances, and you were at the center of it." He finally looked down, a gesture of dismissal. "This has become a very delicate situation, Alessia. A situation that needs to be handled with extreme care." The cold finality in his voice concerned her more than any loud outburst would have. A delicate situation. She was no longer just a daughter. She was a political factor for the family. She looked at the man behind the desk, the man who was her father, and for the first time she saw no trace of family in his eyes. She saw only the strategist. Liam stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the cold night air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of his own silent kingdom. From this height, the city was a tapestry of glittering lights. He held a phone to his ear, listening. "It's quiet, Liam," Finn's voice said. "Too quiet. Falcone's keeping a low profile. It's not like him. After a public challenge like that, he should be making a move." "He's not a dog, Finn," Liam said, his eyes scanning the distant lights of the North End. "He doesn't bark when he's planning a strategy." "What's his play, then?" Liam was silent for a moment. He knew Falcone. He was a creature of pride and control. A challenge to his authority could not go unanswered. If he wasn't responding with open hostility, it was because he had found a more precise, more effective way to retaliate. And then, a cold dread washed over him. She was at the center of it. Alessia's situation was the political tool. And Falcone, a master of the game, would address the source of the complication. He wouldn't come after Liam's soldiers. He would manage the situation that had formed around her. "He's not going to do anything to us," Liam said, a horrifying clarity dawning on him. "He's going to contain the issue. He's going to take measures concerning her." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Finn understood immediately. In their world, there were old rumors about the traditional and very restrictive measures that powerful families sometimes took in delicate cases to avoid scandals or political fallout. "Liam, you can't get involved," Finn said, his voice low and urgent. "This is exactly what he wants, to draw you in further, to make you react emotionally." But Liam was no longer listening. He was staring at the distant lights of her neighborhood, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. The image of her face, pale with fear on the street, filled his mind. He had thought he was helping her. Instead, he had placed her at the very center of a crisis with a ruthless man. He had started this. He had lit the fuse. Her current precarious position was a direct consequence of his actions. It was a debt. And in his world, debts were always paid. "Finn," Liam said, his voice now a low, urgent command. "I need to know if she's all right. Find out what's happening. Discreetly." He ended the call, the silence of the night rushing in. He was no longer thinking about strategy or alliances or the ancient rivalry. He was thinking only of a woman with sorrow in her eyes, a woman whose safety he had just single-handedly jeopardized. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that he would risk his entire world to ensure it. The call from Finn came just after 2 a.m. Liam was in his study, the same room where he had first seen Alessia's name in the paper, but the comforting silence was gone. Now it was a tomb, amplifying the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a second of consequence in a situation he had set in motion. He hadn't slept. He had paced the length of the Persian rug, the amber whiskey untouched, his mind a frantic labyrinth of possibilities, each more concerning than the last. When the phone buzzed, the sound was unnaturally loud, a siren in the stillness. He snatched it from the desk. "Talk to me," he commanded, his voice raw. "I have something," Finn said. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual calm. "One of my contacts inside the Falcone household staff, a cleaning lady. She's worried, Liam, but her son owes us." Liam waited, his entire body rigid. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder. "Falcone had a visitor an hour ago," Finn continued, his words clipped and precise. "Not one of his usual associates. An old man, a doctor, a man known for discretion. He came through the back entrance and left 20 minutes later. The girl, Alessia, she hasn't been seen since this afternoon. Access to the upper floor has been restricted. The staff has been ordered to stay on the main floor." The blood in Liam's veins turned to ice. A discreet doctor. A restricted area. It was a language he understood perfectly. It spoke of a medical evaluation under strict supervision, of urgent measures being taken in the dead of night. Falcone wasn't just planning to send her away. This was something more immediate, a more drastic and immediate handling of the situation. He had miscalculated. He had assumed Falcone would play the long game, arrange a marriage, make a public show of managing the delicate family matter. But he had underestimated the depth of the Don's controlling pride. The public challenge had been too direct, the complication too severe. Falcone wasn't salvaging his alliances. He was dealing with the situation in a radical way, far from public view. Where? Liam's voice was a low hum of controlled intensity, barely recognizable as his own. Where is he taking her? That's the part that's unusual, Finn said, a note of confusion in his voice. There's a car waiting in the back alley, a town car, and the contact heard Falcone on the phone. He mentioned Blackwood. Blackwood. The name struck Liam like a physical blow. It wasn't a place on a map. It was a whispered rumor in Boston's powerful circles. Blackwood Center. An old, obsolete facility, nestled deep in the forests, miles outside the city. It had been shut down for decades, a relic that the city had tried to forget. It was also, he knew, a place that families of influence sometimes used to isolate members involved in public crises. A place where delicate family situations were kept far from the press. He's taking her there. Liam breathed, the horrifying logic of it clicking into place. It was a theatrically severe move, worthy of Marco Falcone. He wasn't just removing her from the city. He was placing her in an extremely restrictive and isolated environment, a measure designed to exert the maximum amount of psychological control. He's making a statement. Liam, it's a trap, Finn pleaded, his voice desperate. You know it is. The place is isolated, defensible. He's expecting you. He's baiting you. I know, Liam said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He was already moving, striding out of the study and toward a hidden panel in the library wall where he kept his security equipment. The cold, practiced motions were automatic. He followed his personal safety protocols, preparing himself for a high-risk situation. You can't go alone, Finn insisted. Let me gather the men. We can organize a direct confrontation. No, Liam cut him off, the word as sharp and final as a closing door. A direct confrontation is what he wants. He wants me to bring my people so he can create chaos and declare victory. He wants a spectacle. He paused, the weight of his decision heavy in his mind. He's going to get a ghost. He was done playing the Don. He was done thinking about territory and alliances. This was not about the Callahan family. This was about a girl with paint on her cheek and sorrow in her eyes. This was a debt, and the payment was long overdue. Listen to me, Finn, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense command. You will do nothing. You will not follow me. You will not bring the men. You will maintain stability here. If I am not back by sunrise, the family's stability comes first. Is that understood? There was a long, painful silence on the other end of the line. Liam could hear the conflict in his friend's breathing, the battle between loyalty to him and loyalty to the organization. Liam, don't do this, Finn whispered, the plea of a brother, not a soldier. Is that understood? Liam repeated, each word a chip of ice. Yes, Finn finally conceded, the word heavy with defeat. Understood. Liam ended the call. He stood in the silent library, the smell of old books, and his own resolve filling his senses. He looked at the portrait of his father that hung over the mantelpiece. The painted eyes were cold, calculating, and proud. They were the eyes of a king who would have called this mission a fool's errand, a king who would have sacrificed a key piece to save the kingdom. But she is not a piece in a game, Liam thought, a fierce protective fire igniting in his chest, burning away the last of the fear and doubt. Not anymore. He turned his back on his father's portrait and walked out into the night, not as a Don, not as a Callahan, but as a man with a singular, determined purpose. He was a man headed to a forgotten place, intent on protecting the one person caught in the middle of this dangerous conflict. The longest night of his life had just begun. Alessia awoke to the smell of dust and disuse. It was a thick, stagnant scent, the smell of damp stone and years of neglect. For a moment, she was suspended in the groggy, disoriented space between sleep and waking. her mind struggling to make sense of the jarring sensations. Her memory of arriving was a confusing haze. She remembered the tense conversation in her father's study. And then, a gap. A chasm of lost time. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. She wasn't in her bed. The surface beneath her was hard and cold, a thin, lumpy mattress on a simple frame. An overwhelming sense of anxiety, sharp and electrifying, began to cut through the fog in her mind. Her eyes snapped open. She was in a small, stark room. The only light was a pale moonlight filtering through a tall, narrow window, which featured an old structure with original metal reinforcements. The moonlight illuminated a scene of profound neglect. The walls were stained with water and grime, the plaster cracked and peeling. In one corner, a simple metal bucket. In the other, a broken wooden chair. This wasn't her home. This was a place designed for isolation. She scrambled off the utilitarian bed, her bare feet recoiling from the freezing, gritty concrete floor. She rushed to the door, a heavy, solid slab of wood with a small grated window at eye level. She gripped the cold iron handle and pulled. It didn't budge. This was clearly an area where access was not permitted without authorization. "Hello?" Her voice was a dry, raspy croak. "Is anyone there? Papa?" The only answer was the mocking echo of her own voice. The silence that followed was absolute, a profound and unsettling emptiness. This wasn't a place of people. It was a place of absence. She pressed her face against the grate of the small window, peering into the hallway beyond. It was a long, dark corridor, lined with old, heavy doors, typical of institutional buildings. Moonlight slanted through a grimy, arched window at the far end, illuminating a setting that seemed stuck in time, as if no one had updated that floor in decades. She didn't know the name of the place, but a feeling she couldn't quite name settled over her. The perception fell on her like a hard truth. This was a place where severe decisions were made. The last vestiges of affection she held for her father finally crumbled into dust. In its place, something new and hard began to form. A cold, defiant fury. He expected her to break, to lie down on that mattress and accept her fate. He expected her to be the fragile artist he had always seen her as. "You have the Falcone fire in you," he had once said. He had no idea how right he was. A noise, a faint scraping sound from down the hall. Alessia froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She pressed her eye to the grated window again, her body rigid with a new kind of anxiety. Two figures emerged from the shadows. One was the discreet, elderly doctor. The other was one of her father's trusted men, Enzo, who was always serious, rigid, and difficult to read. They stopped in front of a door a few rooms down from hers. Enzo produced a large, archaic-looking key and unlocked it. They disappeared inside. Alessia held her breath, her ears straining. She heard a low murmur of voices. Then, a different sound. A soft, rhythmic squeaking. The sound of old, rusty wheels turning. The two men re-emerged. They were pushing a transport cart with a tall object on it, covered by a thick, dusty tarp. As they wheeled the strange cargo past her room, the edge of the tarp snagged on the doorframe, pulling it back for a brief moment. It was a life-size training mannequin, worn by time, with faded paint and erased features. It was a horrifying symbol of how her father now saw her. An object to be managed, to be put away. She realized that this wasn't just an empty building. This was where delicate family situations were handled. And she was just the latest situation. The doctor and Enzo disappeared with their unsettling cargo down a flight of stairs, the squeaking of the cartwheels fading into the oppressive silence. Alessia stumbled back from the door. She slid to the floor, feeling the weight of the situation crush down on her. The fury was gone, replaced by an overwhelming dread. This wasn't just a place of isolation. It was a place where people's futures were decided for them. She wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking back and forth. She worried that important decisions about her future were being made without her. She worried that she would be transferred somewhere else, permanently, without any say in the matter. And she knew, with a certainty that tightened her chest, that they would be coming for her next. A ghost in the garden of static. Liam drove with a cold, focused intensity. The city lights receded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the dark, winding roads of the countryside. The forest closed in on either side, the trees skeletal and black against the moonlit sky. He killed the headlights a mile from the center's rusted gates, navigating the rest of the way by the pale glow of the moon. The car, a nondescript sedan chosen for its anonymity, moved like a phantom over the cracked and weed-choked asphalt of the old service road. He parked in a dense thicket of pines a quarter-mile from the main building, the spot chosen from old schematics he had committed to memory hours earlier. When he stepped out of the car, the silence was profound. Not the silence of the city, which was merely the absence of loud noise, but a deep, primal silence that seemed to soak up sound. The air was cold and smelled of pine needles and damp, decaying leaves. From here, Blackwood Center was a jagged silhouette against the sky, an imposing Gothic structure of slate and stone. Its windows were dark, hollow spaces, its peaked roofs like the hunched shoulders of a forgotten giant. A single, dim light glowed from a window on the ground floor, a lone, watchful eye in the oppressive darkness. Finn had been right. It was a perfect trap, a fortress on a hill. A direct confrontation would be a disaster, but he hadn't come for a direct confrontation. He had come for a single person. He moved through the woods with a practiced silence, a shadow among the trees. His father had taught him many things: how to run a business, how to command respect. But before that, his grandfather, a man who had grown up in the old country, had taught him how to move without being seen, how to listen to the language of the night, how to become a part of the shadows. Tonight, he was his grandfather's boy again. He circled the entire perimeter of the building, his eyes scanning every detail. He saw the single town car parked in the rear courtyard, just as Finn's source had said. He saw two men stationed at the main entrance, their silhouettes visible as they shared a cigarette. They were expecting a loud approach, not a quiet one. He found his entry point on the west side of the building, as the schematics had suggested. An old service cellar, its entrance covered by a heavy, slanted iron door, choked with ivy and half buried in years of dead leaves. It was the building's forgotten back door. The lock was ancient and rusted. It took him less than a minute of patient work before he heard the satisfying metallic click. He lifted the heavy door just enough to slip through, the hinges groaning in protest. He lowered it silently behind him, plunging himself into absolute subterranean darkness. The air in the cellar was cold and stagnant, thick with the smell of mold and damp earth. He didn't turn on a light. He waited, his eyes slowly adjusting to the near-total blackness. He moved by touch, his hand trailing along the cold, damp stone of the wall. He was in a large, open space, his feet crunching on debris. He could hear the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He made his way to the far side of the room, to a staircase he knew would be there. He took the steps one at a time, testing each one for creaks. The door at the top was unlocked. He emerged into a kitchen. The moonlight from a large, grimy window illuminated a scene of industrial decay. Huge rusted ovens, steel tables overturned, pots and pans scattered across the floor. This was where the heart of the institution had once beaten. Now it was just a graveyard of forgotten utility. He could hear voices, faint, coming from the floor above. He moved through the kitchen and into a long, dark corridor. This was the main floor. The light he had seen from the outside was coming from an open doorway down the hall, a makeshift observation room. He crept closer, hugging the shadows. He peered around the edge of the doorway. Two men sat at a card table under the light of a single bare bulb. One was the imposing figure, Enzo. The other was the discreet doctor. A half-empty bottle of brandy sat between them. In the corner of the room, an old transport cart held a strange, lumpy shape under a tarp. "He's taking his time with this one," Enzo grumbled, throwing his cards down. "Why all the theatrics? Why not just send her away quietly? The old doctor took a slow sip of brandy. "Because this is not a simple matter of family discipline," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "This is a performance. He wants the Callahan boy to come. He wants to show him that his efforts are futile, that his grand gestures only lead to more complications for those he tries to protect. She is the focal point of the situation." Enzo grunted. "So what's the plan? We wait for Callahan to show his face?" "We wait for the dawn signal," the doctor corrected. "He is upstairs, explaining the gravity of her situation to the young lady. When he is finished, he will call. Then, we proceed with the next stage of the plan, and her transfer will become permanent. After that, we wait for the grand finale." Liam pulled back into the darkness, his heart pounding with a cold, unshakable resolve. He's with her. Falcone was in the room with her, orchestrating his cruel psychological game. He now knew everything he needed to. The layout, the number of hostiles, their intent. The trap was not just the building, it was the manipulative storyline Falcone had constructed. He slipped away from the door, melting back into the shadows. He found a set of service stairs at the back of the building. They were narrow, steep, and coated in a thick layer of dust. He began to climb. With every step upward, he felt the weight of the building's history pressing in on him. He could almost feel the sadness, the echoes of the difficult stories trapped within the walls. The air grew colder, heavier. This place was a garden of static, where the unresolved emotions of 1,000 past decisions still hummed just beneath the silence. And he was a man walking into the heart of it, determined to intervene in the cruelest story of all. The sound of a key scraping in the lock was a harsh, metallic sound that cut through the silence of the room. Alessia scrambled to her feet, pressing herself into the far corner, her body a taut wire of pure anticipation. The heavy door swung inward with a low groan, revealing the silhouette of her father, a dark, perfectly tailored void against the dim light of the corridor. He stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin and hard to breathe. He did not look at her. Instead, he took a moment to survey the sparse surroundings, his lip curling in a faint, almost imperceptible expression of distaste. "A bit dramatic, I'll admit," he said, his voice a smooth, conversational purr that was more unsettling than any shout. "But you always did have a flair for the dramatic, my little artist. I felt you would appreciate the atmosphere." Alessia remained silent, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched him, this man who was a stranger to her, this figure of authority wearing her father's face. He began to walk slowly around the small room, his expensive shoes making soft, confident sounds on the gritty floor. "This place has a purpose," he said, his voice dropping, taking on the tone of a lecturer. "It is a place of discretion, where delicate family situations are handled. It is a necessary, if unpleasant, part of maintaining stability." He finally stopped and turned his gaze on her. His eyes were flat, devoid of any emotion save a cold, clinical curiosity. "You have become a significant complication, Alessia. Through your carelessness, you allowed our family's name to be drawn into a public conflict. You allowed a Callahan to be seen with you, to use the situation to create a narrative of my perceived weakness." "I did nothing," she choked out, the words feeling fragile and useless. "Exactly," he snapped, the sudden sharpness in his voice making her flinch. "You did nothing. You are a passive thing, a pretty piece of art to be admired and kept safe. But you involved yourself in matters you do not understand. Now the situation must be resolved." He gestured around the room. "This is where delicate situations are resolved." He took a step closer. She could smell his cologne, the scent she had once associated with safety, now the scent of her own undoing. "But do not worry," he said, a cruel, thin smile touching his lips. "It will be quiet. Dr. Moretti is very gifted. You'll be given a mild sedative for your comfort. You'll simply go to sleep. And then, you will be transferred to a private facility overseas, permanently. And we will wait." "Wait for what?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His smile widened. "For your knight in shining armor, of course. For the Callahan boy. When he comes for you, and he will come, his Irish pride will demand it. He will find this room empty. His grand romantic gesture will have led to nothing but your complete and utter disappearance. He will be broken. My authority will be restored. Every problem solved. The sheer monstrous ego of his plan was breathtaking. In that moment, something inside Alessia snapped. The fear did not vanish, but it was consumed by a white-hot, cleansing fire of pure rage. "You are a monster," she said, her voice low and shaking, not with fear, but with a fury so profound it made her feel dizzy. Her father chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I am a king, my dear, and kings must sometimes make difficult choices to protect their kingdoms." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black cell phone. "It is time. I'll just make the call. Enzo will bring the doctor." He turned his back to her, a final, dismissive gesture. He was so confident in her helplessness that he didn't even see her as a factor. He raised the phone to his ear. And in that instant, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the corridor behind him. It moved with a silence that was supernatural. It was in the doorway before Marco Falcone had even registered a change in the light. "I think that call will have to wait." The voice was not loud. It was a low, calm whisper, but it carried a chilling weight that made the air in the room grow cold. Marco Falcone froze, his body going rigid. He turned, slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. Liam Callahan stood in the doorway. He was not the man from the library, or even the man from the street. He was something else entirely. A specter. His face was pale and drawn in the dim light, but his gray eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying fire. He held nothing in his hands. He didn't need to. Alessia stared, her breath caught in her throat. He had come. He had walked into the lion's den. For her. Falcone recovered quickly, his shock morphing into a smug, triumphant grin. "Callahan. Right on cue. Predictable. Did you come alone, you fool? My men are downstairs. They know I am up here. You are trapped." "There's no one downstairs to hear you," Liam said, his voice still that same, unnervingly calm whisper. "They've been reassigned." The smile on Falcone's face faltered. A flicker of doubt appeared in his cold eyes. "You're bluffing," he hissed. Liam didn't answer. He simply took a slow, deliberate step into the room. His eyes never left Falcone. "So this is your grand plan?" Falcone sneered, trying to regain control. "You take me out? My entire organization will hunt you. My absence will start a war." "You're right," Liam said. He was now only a few feet from Falcone. "Removing you would be a mistake. It would make you a martyr. The war would be messy." He glanced at Alessia, just for a fraction of a second, a silent, protective promise in his eyes. Then he looked back at Falcone. "I'm not here to remove you, Marco. I'm here to unmake you." Before Falcone could process the words, Liam's gaze shifted to something over Falcone's shoulder. A flicker of a nod, almost imperceptible. Falcone, confused, turned to look. Standing in the darkened corridor behind him, where there had been nothing a moment before, were two of his most trusted lieutenants. They were not looking at Liam. They were looking at Falcone, their faces grim, their loyalty conspicuously absent. The color drained from Marco Falcone's face. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor. His breath hitched, a pathetic, gasping sound. This was not a hostile takeover. This was a coup. "A king," Liam said, his voice dripping with contempt, "needs a kingdom. He needs the loyalty of his men." He gestured with his chin toward the two men in the hall. They no longer see a king. They see a liability. A man who would sacrifice his own family for pride, and in doing so, risk a war that would destroy everything they have built. Falcone staggered back, his eyes wide with the horror of a man watching his entire world dissolve before him. He sank to his knees, not from a physical blow, but from the crushing weight of total and absolute defeat. "You will not be a martyr," Liam whispered, standing over the defeated figure. You will be a cautionary tale. The proud Don Falcone, who lost everything in a single night because he put his pride before his power. Your men have made a new choice. Your kingdom is already gone. I didn't have to burn it down. You did. He turned his back on the pathetic creature on the floor and walked to Alessia, who was still pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. He reached out his hand. It was steady. We're leaving, he said, his voice now gentle, the storm within him having passed. She stared at his outstretched hand, the hand of a Callahan, the hand of an enemy, the hand of the only man who had walked through the gates of hell to find her. She took it. His grip was firm, warm, and real. He pulled her away from the wall and led her out of the room, stepping over the defeated figure of her father without a second glance. The journey back to the city was a blur of motion and silence. Liam drove with a focused intensity, his eyes fixed on the ribbon of road illuminated by the headlights. The first hints of dawn were beginning to stain the eastern sky, a bruised purple bleeding into a soft, hopeful gray. The world was waking up, oblivious to the quiet coup that had transpired in the House of Forgotten Stories. Alessia sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in Liam's jacket. It was too big for her, smelling of the cold night air, of pine, and faintly of him. She hadn't said a word since they had left Blackwood. She stared out the window, watching the skeletal trees give way to the familiar shapes of buildings, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was a canvas of fractured images, the cold dread of the isolated room, the chilling sight of the training mannequin, her father's monstrous manipulative plan, and then Liam, the way he had appeared in the doorway like a specter of quiet power, the strategic, shocking efficiency with which he dismantled her father's world without laying a hand on him, the gentleness of his own hand as he led her away. She was free, but the cage she had escaped was not just the stone walls of the facility, it was the entire world her father had built, a world of lies, power, and cold strategy. And she knew, with a certainty that was both liberating and terrifying, that she could never go back. There was no home to return to. She stole a glance at the man beside her. His profile was etched in the dim light of the dashboard. The cold, dangerous fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. He was not a monster. He was not a simple savior. He was a man forged in the same world as her father, but who had somehow, impossibly, chosen to use his power to protect rather than to control. They arrived at his penthouse, as the sun finally broke over the horizon, flooding the city with a clean, golden light. His home was the opposite of hers. Where her father's house was filled with dark wood and the weight of history, Liam's was a space of glass, steel, and light. It was modern, minimalist, and overlooked the entire city. It was also profoundly empty. Liam led her to a guest bathroom, its clean, white marble a stark contrast to the neglect of the facility. There are clean clothes in the closet, he said, his voice quiet, careful. Towels. Anything you need. Take your time. He paused at the door. Alessia, I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. He wasn't just apologizing for the horrors of the night. He was apologizing for the street, for his name, for the part he had played in the game that had led to her father's extreme measures. She simply nodded, the words trapped in her throat. He closed the door, leaving her alone. The hot water of the shower felt like a baptism, washing away the dust of the facility, the scent of neglect, the lingering chill of her father's world. She stayed under the spray until the water began to run cold, letting the physical sensation ground her, wash away the lingering static of fear. When she emerged, wrapped in a soft, oversized robe, she found him on the balcony, staring out at the rising sun. A tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat on a small table. He had changed his clothes, and the deep exhaustion in his eyes was the only evidence of the night's draining events. He turned as she approached, his gray eyes searching her face. Are you all right? I don't know what I am, she answered honestly, her voice raw. She walked to the railing, standing beside him, not touching. They looked out at the city, a sprawling, beautiful beast waking below them. What happens now? Now, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble beside her. You are free. My people have spread the word. Marco Falcone has stepped back. A shift in leadership. He's alive, but his authority is gone. His former lieutenants are already restructuring things. No one will come looking for you. To them, you are a ghost, the daughter of a fallen man. A ghost. It was what he had called himself. A strange shared fate. She took a sip of the coffee he offered her. The warmth spread through her. And what about you? She asked, finally looking at him. This creates instability. Even with my father gone, his people. There will be no war, he said with a quiet, unshakable certainty. There will be chaos. And I will manage it. This is what I do. He looked at her. And for the first time, a faint, sad smile touched his lips. But I think, perhaps, I am tired of it. The silence that fell between them was different now. It was a clean, quiet space, a space of possibility. I have a place, he said, turning his gaze back to the horizon. A small cottage on the coast, a few hours from here. No one knows I own it. It's quiet. You could go there, be safe, decide what you want your new life to look like. It was an offer, a way out, a chance to be someone other than a Falcone, a chance to just be Alessia, the artist. And you? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Would you be there? Liam was silent for a long time, the rising sun catching the conflict in his stormy gray eyes. He had a kingdom to rule. But he looked at the woman beside him, at the quiet strength that had survived a nightmare, at the spirit he had first seen in a dusty art gallery, and he knew that his empty kingdom in the sky was no longer enough. Yes, he said, the single word an oath, a promise. If you'll have me. Alessia looked out at the endless expanse of the sky, the sun now bright and warm on her face. Her old life was over, dismantled in a single night. A new one was beginning, a blank canvas stretched out before her. It was a terrifying, unknown landscape. But as she stood beside the quiet, complicated man who had walked into the darkness to find her, she realized for the very first time that she would not have to paint it alone. The silence was finally filled, not with fear, but with the promise of a shared future.